Welcome everyone to this part 3 of Content Conversations, our occasional series on event content. Today it gives me great pleasure to welcome someone who's a bit of a heavy hitter in the content world, Claire Tulloch, who is currently content director at Tembo and director at Tulloch Consultancy. Now, Claire, you have formerly held several senior positions in various different companies. Content director at Essential, managing director at UBM Conferences Europe, and also conference manager and conference director at EMAP. And before that, you were a conference producer. So very experienced, lots of really well-informed views and opinions. So welcome, Claire, and thank you so much for joining us today. I feel really privileged to have you talking to us. I'd like to start by rewinding, going back in time and thinking right back to the beginning of your career and how you got into events in the first place.
So I, like many people in the sector, fell into events. When I came out of university, I did the NHS management training scheme and worked in the NHS as a manager for 7 years, and then decided to leave that and went travelling for a year to try and think about what I wanted to do next. And so I ended up doing a temp job with Reed Exhibitions in Sydney, and was a telesales exec on one of their big exhibitions. And I was quite good at it, and I quite enjoyed working there, albeit for a short period. They gave me a really great reference, and I thought when I got back home I'd investigate it further, and I did. And I got my first job with a small conference company, delivering events at that point, which was all around the emergence of the internet and how businesses were taking advantage of it. So I was launching conferences in all sorts of different sectors, and it was very much having to do everything, finding out your own data, sourcing your own data, securing speakers and so on. It was all very new, but it was a really great and steep learning curve. I did that for a year and then decided I wanted to join a business that had a brand attached to it rather than being in the pure play sector. So I joined EMAP Conferences, which had been in existence for about a year at that point. And they gave me, my first gig was working on Middle East events. And I didn't think, I had preconceived ideas about the Middle East. So I said to them, look, I'll do one conference, but I really don't think it's a good idea as a woman working on a Middle East event. And that was the start. That didn't turn out to be the case. It was very easy as a woman to work in most of the Middle East. And effectively, I launched Mead Conferences off the back of a publication at EMAP, and worked on that over about a 7-year period. And I commuted effectively in and out of the Middle East. I never lived there.
Wow.
And I grew a division, a really successful division, grew to about 5 million. I think it was about £5 million by the time I left. We had about 35 conferences and a team of about 20. And it was probably one of my proudest achievements in my career. Really enjoyed that role. It was incredible. Great team to work with. And then after that, I moved on to UBM Conferences. And again, that was looking to launch conferences off the back of exhibitions rather than publications. And I have to say that proved a bit more challenging.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I think the advantage if you've got publications is you've got quite a powerful connection with your audience from a content perspective, because they come to that publication, they respect that publication, and they're really engaged with it because they probably read it regularly. And so actually contacting those individuals to launch conferences is an awful lot easier. And you also have editorial staff who are there that can give you kind of openings into different sectors. They've got good connections. So it's definitely an easier route to launch from. Look, and I don't want to create the impression it's not possible to do it with exhibitions. It absolutely is. And we launched and delivered many successful conferences.
Interesting. What are some of the other key differences between those two types of conference, do you think?
They probably perceived that brand as being, the exhibition rather than something that they associated with a conference where they would go and secure content, and insights and case studies, all the elements that you would normally get from a conference.
So the attendee is going thinking, I'm going to find some new suppliers and look at some cool new products or whatever. They're not thinking, this is where I go to get the latest information about what's new in the industry and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And look, that was, I left there in 2012, and I think that's probably changed. I definitely see now with a lot of exhibitions, they're much more content rich. There's been a real sort of sea change in the sort of recognition that content offers a real opportunity at exhibitions to create stickiness, retention, so people will come back because they want the combination of getting industry insights and also being able to speak to suppliers.
Yeah, interesting. So there's been a bit more of a sort of convergence into more the convex model, if you like.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. You can see more and more of those emerging in many different sectors, definitely.
Interesting. So in terms of your career, where have we got up to so far? Are we still?
So that was UBM. So I left UBM in 2012, and then I moved onto a role working with a company that went through various guises. It started off as eye-to-eye events and then became Essential Exhibitions. And that was a great environment because the CEO, Mark Sashua, really recognised the value of content. And I took over a small internal team of conference producers who were delivering on-site content at exhibitions. And there was real appetite for developing that element of content on-site. And so I grew a team again, and the individuals in the team would work with one or two brands all the year round, so that they really developed good relationships with the teams. They were obviously really critical to the event itself, but they also started supporting the idea around 365 content. So there were that was the sort of emergence, I guess, of webinars starting to happen. Things like Twitter conversations before events to try and create motivations for people to attend, supporting marketing on copy. And I think also the individuals that I work with were really quite key in terms of working on the sales teams, giving them really great bite-sized nuggets of audience insights. There was a real recognition that audience insights were really supportive, in terms of an exhibition, in terms of supporting teams to deliver commercial partners, exhibitors to their events.
Interesting. So that sounds like there's a real link to business strategy there.
Yeah.
So identifying ways in which the content strategy can support and feed into the broader corporate strategy.
Yeah.
It might be just for a single event brand, or it could be for the whole business, depending on what the business is,
Yeah.
I guess. And do you put that down to it being a particularly visionary? Did you say it was the chief exec? Or
yeah, the chief executive, Mark Sashua. And obviously now he heads up, because it's now Hive.
Yeah, and that obviously seems like the way that Hive tend to do a lot of their events now. They're very content rich,
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So that's essential.
That's essential. And then that role, they then made a decision that they decentralized the team. So the decision was made that actually the conference content producers would actually work directly with the brands, and they didn't need anybody overseeing them. So at that stage, I left Essential in 2017 and thought, actually, I'd quite like to freelance. I'd like the opportunity to do something different. So I started freelancing and really enjoyed it. Was very fortunate. I had a great network and got lots of work. But what had been interesting, one of the challenges I'd faced as a content director when I was at Essential was, I'd often need freelance resource, because I was, somebody might be off sick, or we were looking to launch an event. And so I had a roster of freelancers I'd use, but if they weren't available, I'd have to go on to what was effectively like the Wild West of LinkedIn. And I had a couple of freelancers that let me down, didn't deliver what they say they deliver. And it really made me think, gosh, there's a real opportunity for somebody to connect individuals who've been vetted to event organisers. Because, when you're in that situation, it's generally an emergency and you just want a robust solution, somebody that will come in and absolutely do what you need them to do.
Yeah, and this is the story. Everything to do with events, right? It's about, you need trust. Yeah. You need to know that you can rely.
Absolutely.
Can and will deliver. Yeah. So
definitely.
Sorry, Go on.
No, and it was interesting. I had a conversation with my colleagues at Essential. I was talking about this challenge, Dave Langrish, and he'd said to me, "You should think about getting in touch with Kate Disley because she set up a business which is around providing marketing resource to event organisers, which was going really well." So that kind of planted a seed, and I guess then Kate and I bumped into each other. So serendipity of events. We bumped into each other at Event Tech Live in 2018 and literally had a conversation on the show floor, and that then turned into me joining Tembo and launching Tembo Content in March 2019.
Right, wow. So she's already doing Tembo. You're already doing Tulloch Consultancy at this point, right?
That's right.
So you're doing a little bit of freelance stuff, and having looked at your LinkedIn, it looks like you're doing quite a range of services there, from very strategic level, kind of looking at strategy and team resource and all the rest of it, right down to delivery.
Yeah.
Whatever somebody needs, they can come and find you and you can help them.
Exactly.
So you've been doing this for a couple of years. You bump into Kate at Ventec Live.
Yeah.
And you have this chat about what she's doing with Tembo. So what was she doing with Tembo at the time?
So at the time, she launched Tembo as effectively a resourcing agency connecting freelance marketing execs with event organisers. So and had I think at that point she was just started. I think she'd also set up an internal marketing agency that could provide marketing services to event organisers too.
Got you.
So conference production in many ways was a natural addition.
So then you kind of get together with Kate, create Tembo Content, which is the kind
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
The part of the Tembo brand that's around what you do.
Yeah.
And what happened next?
Well, so obviously that was March 2019. So I was tapping into my network, starting to build a roster of freelancers. And that went pretty well. So I started putting people into projects, discussing projects with clients, and starting to build the business. And then obviously the pandemic hit at the beginning of 2020, which at the time felt catastrophic. Yeah. But of all, I suppose, all of the sort of divisions within Tembo, it was content, which was the bit that, as event organisers started to pivot to digital, the one thing they absolutely needed was content. And actually, because many companies had let staff go, they didn't have resource. Right. So actually, what ended up happening is they ended up coming to me for freelance resource that could help them with their online content effectively.
Yeah. So it actually turned into a bit of an opportunity.
It did. Yeah. Well, yes, it was an opportunity actually. And look, it wasn't the sort of growth that it would have been from in an ordinary world, but I mean, would never have predicted at the beginning of the pandemic that I would have had the opportunity to carry on connecting freelancers with roles. Yeah. So it was relatively positive experience. And then clearly after the pandemic started to subside, you end up with a lot of event organisers wanting to restart projects and obviously looking to run their events again, but they didn't have any resource. So then I got deluged with lots and lots of requests for resource. And sort of 2021, 22 was a big year effectively because so many people needed freelancers.
Yeah.
And recognized, the benefit of having them come in and support their businesses.
Great. What are those benefits? Of
course. So look, the benefits of a good freelance conference producer, I also provide event managers, is what you're getting is somebody who's usually really experienced. Most of the individuals that are on my books, they've got at least 8 years experience in-house. Many of them got up to conference manager roles, conference director roles, and have decided to step back for lots of different reasons. And so they're really keen to, they're keen, they've got great knowledge and experience. So they really hit the ground running when you take them on. Because I think I've got about 50 on my books now, I can generally turn around projects very quickly. So I can usually find somebody within a couple of days to a week who can start the work. So I guess the elements from an organiser's perspective, what you get from a freelancer is you're getting really great experience and knowledge. So often what clients will say to me is, this individual's brought a really great, new set of eyes, fresh pair of eyes to our event. It's really helped us think about formats and approach and so on. So you're not just getting a conference producer, you're getting another layer of expertise that they bring. They're obviously very experienced, so they're self-managing most of the time. They don't need much support or management. They'll get on with the project, and I suppose also they're very motivated because obviously their reputation is based on the work they're doing. So if they're doing a good job, they will get more work.
Yeah, sure. And for if you're a business owner or event director or whatever, you can flex your workforce a bit more by using freelancers, right? There's less commitment.
Well, you absolutely can. And what's really interesting, that one of the trends I've noticed post-pandemic is that event organisers have, in some instances, I get the impression some of them actually haven't gone back to the same headcount they had pre-pandemic. They've actively made the decision, I guess probably to save on overhead, partly to make the decision that actually they'll outsource every year 10-15% of the number of events they run, because it helps them manage costs more effectively.
Yeah. So that kind of implies that it's a growth opportunity there, that freelancing is definitely an area of growth for any conference producers who are thinking about their own careers and thinking about where they might want to go in the future.
It is. I guess the challenge, when I frequently get people approaching me wanting to talk about what's freelancing like, what's the market like, and the one thing I say is, look, there are a lot. I've probably doubled each year the number of freelancers coming onto my books. So there are lots of other freelancers out there. I think there's definitely sufficient work, but there's some competition.
Yeah, interesting. And so what would be the typical criteria that a client would be using to decide who to work with? Or do they just say, Claire, you know who we are, or this is our conference, recommend someone? Or would they be looking for specific things, like, do they want particular industry or sector knowledge? Or do they want a number of years experience? Or what are they looking for?
So normally when they come to me, they generally, not always, but often it's an emergency. So effectively, I've got this conference which needs producing. I need someone to start as soon as possible, and it needs finishing by X time. What I try to do is to match an individual with sector knowledge if I possibly can, because that makes the process always much easier.
Let's start.
However, as a conference producer, you should be able to work in any sector, because our job is about the ability to research with an audience and be able to extract information, understand what the challenges are, and turn that into topics.
Yeah.
But clearly, with more technical topics, it definitely helps if you've got sector knowledge. So what I tend to do is they'll give me a brief, and what I'll do is I'll go out to my freelance community to find out who's in a position potentially to work on it and has sector knowledge. I then send over profiles to the client. They'll have a conversation with the freelancer, and generally, I'll usually send a couple of profiles, and they'll decide who they want to work with, and then we work out the contract from there.
Perfect.
It's time saving. I really feel like what I'm offering clients is I really understand conference production, so I can help them with timelines, because obviously not everybody that approaches me with a client is necessarily from a conference production background. Some of them are sales individuals, and they don't always know what's the timeline that will be needed for this particular project. So obviously I can help them with that.
Yeah. So, because that was another question that was in my mind, was, I guess your recommendation might partly be based on how much time there is to turn this conference around. So if it's really tight, then it's much more important that someone already has some sector knowledge and connections.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
A long run in, maybe they've got time to research that industry.
Definitely, yeah. And the projects come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, I've had two clients in the last couple of weeks who said, look, we've got a conference which I need to get 20 speakers over the next month, because the event's in, 2 months beyond that. And literally I'm parachuting a freelancer in that can pick up the event, do a bit of desk research to get on top of it, to get an understanding of the program, and then can crack on with the speaker acquisition.
Yeah. My next question was going to be, what does a typical client look like? But I'm not sure if there is a typical client. But
there's not. I mean, all of the big and small conference companies and exhibition companies have probably worked with Tembo at some time or other. Definitely.
Does it tend to be B2B or B2C conferences as opposed to scientific and academic, or?
It tends to be predominantly the B2B sector. I haven't done anything in the scientific sector. I mean, look, I think there's probably opportunities there, and there's probably opportunities in the corporate sector as well. But to be honest, I've had, the business has been, Tembo Content has been growing like 35% year on year.
Wow.
So I've always got projects coming in, trying to find freelancers. So far, really haven't had an opportunity to step into the corporate sector and look at the opportunities there. But yeah, that's definitely an opportunity for us.
Yeah, I think from my own experience with Lineup Ninja, we've got clients. Most of our clients are sort of B2B, same kind of clients that I think you're working with. And the scientific ones, they will tend to have an abstract submission review process that may have content.
Precisely.
Director as such, it's all done by the scientific committee.
Yeah.
Great. You've answered loads of the questions I had written down here already without me even having to ask them. What about moving on to Tulloch Consultancy? And so you're still doing some...
I do a bit of that, a little bit. But to be honest, the majority of my time is really on Tembo Content now. And we also provide, Tembo now provides a service called Tembo Refresh, where we provide consultancy services. So actually, I'm tending to do some of the majority of my consultancy now through Tembo.
Got you. Okay. And so what sort of services are those that you're providing under Refresh?
So, absolutely. So again, those come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I mean, the kinds of things that we'll often get asked to do is maybe scoping projects around clients. So there's so much launch activity going on. That's a big part of, I guess, the provision of freelancers to event organisers. They want somebody to come in and help them validate topics, give them an idea about kind of entrance into a new region, for example. So that's one example. Then I've also had consultancy projects come away that maybe are associations that run one event a year, and what they want is somebody who can help them to enhance the event they run at the minute, because they maybe don't have the internal expertise to see the kind of ways they could grow their event or do things differently or do things more efficiently as well.
Right. So that's a real advantage of bringing in an external consultancy, because you've got that wider view of what everyone else is doing in the market and some of those opportunities that they might not be able to see themselves.
Absolutely. Yes.
And yeah, particularly having worked in an association myself in the distant past, often they can be so internally focused on their own membership and their own day-to-day management and running and delivering value to members. And for a lot of them, I guess the annual conference is essentially a bit of a cash cow for them. But it can take away so much resource from just being an association and supporting your members.
Exactly that. They don't necessarily, many of them don't seem to have individuals with a content head. They'll have somebody who's an event manager that can take care of the logistics and obviously marketing resource, but they don't necessarily have the individual that can drive the content. That's sometimes a challenge for them, because they can't really justify having a year-round content individual for one or two events a year.
Yeah, sure. That was very much my experience. I was actually the education and learning person.
Okay.
At an annual conference, you're going to do all of that as well. And it's like, okay. Anyway, that's another story for another day. What about? So that's been great. Hearing about your kind of experience and your career up to date. I think you've already touched on this a couple of times, but what big challenges have you had on your kind of career progression, going from, conference producer right up to, now being a sort of director?
Really interesting. So I would say my biggest learning curve throughout my career has been people management, because I think it is one of the most difficult things to get right in any job. And I look back and I cringe at some of when I was working on the Mead conferences division, I was so passionate about it, and but I was also a complete micromanager. I must have been awful. And one of my team, who was brilliant, actually, I can remember her saying to me, "I've got this, I can do it myself, you do not need to keep asking me questions." And effectively, she didn't quite say it, but she meant, like, can you back off? And that was a real epiphany moment. It really made me realize, if you want to motivate staff, you've got to be able to kind of balance up that piece of encouraging them and motivating them, but also giving them space to maybe sometimes get things wrong, because that's the only way they're going to learn. And when I went to the job at Essential, I tried really hard to put that into practice, because I had a great manager there, and because of her management technique, which was very much about leaving me, she was very much full delegation. You get on with the role, and let's discuss any challenges you face. But she didn't tend to intervene, and it was a really good experience working for somebody like that, because I then learned from her and replicated that. And I can see in the team that I developed that they really appreciated the autonomy, particularly at kind of the conference manager level. They really loved the fact that they could get on with things, and I would let them run with new ideas that they had. And so that was part of it, I'd say, people management. I think the other thing that I'm really big on is collaboration. And so what I used to do with my conference producers was get them together every month to share best practice, practical examples of what they were applying in their exhibition content. And so that meant we could not everything replicates onto other exhibitions, but you could see how something was working with one audience. Could that work with another? And I think that meant we created as a result, we had a creative team that innovated. And I think the portfolio directors really appreciated the approach that they took.
Wow. So, yeah, that's really interesting. The thing about autonomy really resonates with me. How was it for you, that experience of letting go? Because I know it can be very difficult.
Well, I found it easier because it really stayed with me, this feedback I'd got from that job. And it made me think, you've got to give people a chance, and I think, you go through different roles and you get more experienced about how people operate and what their motivations are. So, you maybe give some people a little bit more autonomy than others.
Yeah.
But I was very much, I think, because I had this boss at Essential, Anique, she was great, and just her approach, I recognized that it really worked for me. I found it really motivating that she fully delegated authority to me. Yeah. And so that gave me the confidence to do that with my team.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that kind of role model piece is really important, individuals demonstrating the right way to approach people management.
Yeah. Like what you model is super important for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll imitate each other and learn.
We do. Yeah, exactly.
I've come across an interesting model of motivation, which I think is mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So if people have got those, if they can master their practice of whatever it is they're doing, so being a conference producer, so if they feel that they're working towards developing their skills, they have autonomy in the sense that they can decide what to do as long as they've got an overall clarity about what their aims are.
Yeah.
And they've got some latitude to use their own initiative within that, and they have some kind of higher purpose or some reason why they're doing what they want to do. Then that's, if you can balance those three things effectively, then that will really help to motivate them. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear you talking about autonomy and how important that is. And I imagine that's quite a challenge for a lot of event managers, because stereotypically event managers, we're all control freaks, and we need to know things. For lots of good reasons,
Absolutely, I'm sure it must be. I suspect that must be a real lesson for a lot of people. Because also, if you micromanage, you end up working ridiculous hours because you're constantly intervening and checking things. It's not it's not an efficient way to work, but it's also not a motivating work. It's not a way to motivate a team to work like that either.
For sure. Great. I'd sort of like to just move on to some stuff about like trends and where you think things that you're seeing in your clients and some of your conference producers. What are some, rather than me kind of priming you with some ideas, what are the main things that you're seeing, big themes around at the moment?
Big themes, absolutely. So I guess interesting for me, one of the kind of biggest trends, I guess, post-pandemic is that whereas before the pandemic, I would have clients come to me and say, right, I need a freelancer that can work on a project and I need them to work full-time over a 6-week conference production cycle. That was quite a sort of normal approach pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, I think things have shifted. There's been a real shift. And when I speak to my freelancers and clients in multiple sectors, what's happening now is it's taking longer to engage individuals to get them on research calls, and it's taking longer to get speaker confirmations.
Right. What do you put on?
And so I think some of it is that just people are just really busy. I think there are more events out there. So there's more events competing in different spaces. So they're probably being approached for multiple events. And I think the other part of it is that companies are being stricter about how many events they will allow individuals to speak at, participate at annually as well. I think that's playing a role. So what I'm tending to find is I'll get clients coming to me saying, can I have a freelancer that will work 2 to 3 days a week over a 10-week period to fulfill that project? It's a more efficient way of delivering it rather than, because it would actually be very difficult to complete a project in a 6-week cycle now, I think, in a lot of sectors.
Yeah. What's the reason that some people are limiting how often their stuff can go and speak? Is it literally down to resource? Like you can't spend the office or?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think it's partly just around, time focused on their role. If you're off maybe a perception that if you're off attending multiple conferences and events all the time, are you devoting enough time to your job? I mean, maybe that's part of it. I think there's definitely the T&E part, travel and expenses, the cost of actually going potentially overseas. And I think also sustainability. I've heard from a few people saying there's a sustainability element that some companies will have quotas of, you can go to X number of overseas events annually.
Yeah. Well, that's commendable. That's good.
I know, exactly. I mean, that seems to be more amongst some of the big corporates who are saying that. But I think, and also I think potentially individuals are being more selective about the events that they will speak at. They want to feel confident they're going to an event that's going to have exactly the kind of peer group they want to network with.
Yeah. And I imagine that those kind of constraints will be more or less pronounced in different types of roles as well. So someone who's in marketing or sales might have much more free reign to go and speak at as many conferences as they want.
Definitely.
The engineering
Definitely.
team or whatever. Then.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It definitely depends on the type of event.
Yeah. What about the ways in which organisers are leveraging their content? Are you seeing any sort of trends or changes or different?
I mean, look, there's been for a very long time, there's been the whole conversation about 365 approaches. And I think you definitely see much more across all events now. You see way more 365 approaches in terms of if you don't have a publication, many events will make sure that they've got webinars going on topics between an event. And I'm also seeing some of it's interesting. So I was looking at Shop Talk, for example. What they've got some big annual events, and they've also got some smaller aligned events they're running alongside them, focused on specific topics. I think that's that potentially event organisers are maybe going for a bit of a kind of hub and spoke approach. Having a big flagship event and then potentially some regional smaller events that support it between times, keep the touch points going.
Yeah.
So those might be virtual events, those might be face-to-face events.
Mm. And so I was listening in on Bogdan Moran and Marijn van der Buren's podcast. They had Tamar Beck on from Gleaning yesterday.
Okay.
And Bogdan went on a bit of a rant about there's so much content gets generated at events, and a lot of it just gets
I know.
in the context of AI generated content. So
Yeah.
there's no need to generate all this content with AI. We've already got tons of content for all these events, but it just gets kind of left to go to waste and sort of wither on the vine after the event's gone, and people aren't using it. Are you seeing any? What do you think about that? Do you think that's still a problem? Do you think it's improving? Do you think
it's probably always been the case? I think what's interesting, that one of the things I'm seeing is that what clearly, the AI and technology are going to, they're already starting to play an increasing role. Like, so I'm seeing in, the sort of creating efficiencies in the workflow process, different kind of technologies coming through are definitely affecting those. From a content perspective, one of the things I think is interesting is the idea around using AI to do summaries of content at events. I think that's really helpful. So I read something on LinkedIn the other day, an organizer saying, what we're doing at the end of each session is to get AI to write a summary of that session. And actually that's really valuable because, often you go to events, you sit through multiple sessions and you get quite overwhelmed with information. Sure. So having the opportunity to get somebody to give you bite-sized chunks of that's a summary of that session and some of the kind of talking points, etc. I think that's really valuable to people when they go back to the office, because often, when I do the research for a conference, people often say to me, I want to come to the event and get case study examples I can take back to the office. But I wonder sometimes, because they get so much information at a conference, how much of it do they then go back and implement? Yeah. So I think AI definitely has a really important role potentially to play in supporting providing individuals with summaries of some of the sort of key talking points, takeaways from events, that they don't have to kind of go back to a notebook or whatever to distill.
I think that you're right. I think that sounds like it's a really big opportunity. In terms of practical, how would that be delivered? All the content's recorded during the session, and then there would be a sort of AI tool to transcribe it to text, and then another AI tool just to summarize the text output, maybe? Is that...
I guess. I mean, look, Otter AI, that's certainly so I do webinars with my freelancers every couple of months on different topics, and we did one a while ago on AI tools they're using. And obviously something like Otter AI is really valuable because it will transcribe the conversation, but it obviously will provide a summary as well. Yeah. So, I'm sure that it may be possible to use tools like that.
Sure. Yeah.
On site that can fulfill that. So you don't necessarily have to have it been filmed, but there must be, I'm guessing, the ability to use a tool like that to provide summaries.
Yeah, sure. I'm a little bit conscious of time.
No, sorry, I've been waffling on.
No, this has been great. Last sort of few kind of questions before we wrap up. So, have you got any advice that you would give to a young content manager or conference producer looking to progress their career?
So I think the advice I would give to somebody who came in and became a conference producer is, in the early part of your career, move around, don't get stuck in one organization and work there for 5-6 years. Try and move around every 18 months if you don't get promotion opportunity in that organization, because it's really valuable early in your career to get experiences working in different cultures and different sectors, working for different managers. I think it really supports you in developing your career. And, when I look back at my career, I think, gosh, I did stay in companies for quite chunky amounts of time. And actually, I think, being more agile and maybe changing, I think you'll get lots of value in terms of development.
Interesting. So you heard it here first, people. Move around.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to plug something?
So I suppose the thing I'd want to plug is, look, Tembo Tembo Content and what we do at Tembo, I think we're a unique service. I don't think there's anything out there that provides quite the service we do. We really try and tailor, I try and make sure when I'm putting freelancers forward to clients that I'm there. I want to save you time in terms of finding the right individual that meets your needs and is high quality. I vet them all. Yeah. I interview them. I collect references for them. It's really important to me that they're providing good service for you because I've been in your shoes and I know how difficult it can be.
Yeah. And great, thank you. And are you looking for more people to put on your roster?
Yeah, I'm always looking for freelancers, always happy to chat to freelancers. I generally need freelance conference producers who've got B2B experience, have done at least 5 years in a company. And I also provide event managers as well.
Right.
So see event managers, again, with ideally 5 years experience working in B2B events.
Great. So how can potential freelancers and potential new clients get in touch with you? Via the Tembo website?
The Tembo website, I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, those types of all the usual ways. I guess LinkedIn's a really, look, I, like everyone else, use it daily. So LinkedIn's definitely a good way to get in touch with me.
Yeah, great. And maybe I can put some contact details under the video.
That would be great.
Put a link to the Tembo website and stuff. Great. Listen, this has been amazing, Claire. Obviously your experience is really deep and you've got a super well-informed perspective on all things conference production and content management. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to have you on the show. So thank you very much.
Not at all, Joe. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks very much for asking me.